Studies Section 4, Theories of Child Development. An infant interacting with its environment, gaining experience, and learning new things is equal to development. Introduction. As a continuation of the previous study historical views of a childhood development, in this session, you should learn some relevant theories of child development. Specifically, focus will be on Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory, and Jean Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study session, you should be able to 1. Explain psychoanalytic theory. 2. Discuss psychosocial theory. 3. Explain Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. Psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, developed his ideas about psychoanalytic theory from work with mental patients. He was a medical doctor who specialized in neurology. He spent most of his years in Vienna, though he moved to London near the end of his career because of the Nazis' anti-Semitism. Freud, 1917, believed that personality has three structures: the ID, the ego, and the superego. The ID is the Freudian structure of personality that consists of instincts which are an individual's reservoir of psychic energy. In Freud's view, the ID is totally unconscious. It has no contact with reality. As children experience the demands and constraints of reality, a new structure of personality emerges. The ego, the Freudian structure of personality that deals with the demands of reality. The ego is called the executive branch of personality because it is the rational part of the personality. The ID and the ego have no morality. They do not take into account whether something is right or wrong. The superego is the Freudian structure of personality that is the moral branch of personality. The superego takes into account whether something is right or wrong. The oral stage is the first Freudian stage of development. This occurs during the first 1 to 8 months of life, in which the infant's pleasure centers on the mouth. Chewing, sucking, and biting are the chief sources of pleasure. The anal stage is the second Freudian stage of development. This occurs between 1 and 3 years of age, in which the child's greatest pleasure involves the anus or the eliminative functions associated with it. The phallic stage is the third Freudian stage of development, which occurs between the ages of 3 and 6. Its name comes from the Latin word phallus, which means penis. The latency stage is the fourth Freudian stage of development, which occurs between approximately 6 years of age and puberty. At this stage, the child represses all interest in sexuality and develops social and intellectual skills. The genital stage is the fifth and final Freudian stage of development. This occurs from puberty onwards. The genital stage is a time of sexual reawakening. The source of sexual pleasure now becomes someone outside of the family. When resolved, the individual is capable of developing a mature love relationship and functioning independently as an adult. The psychosocial theory of Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson, 1902 to 1994, recognized Freud's contributions, but believed that Freud misjudged some important dimensions of human development. For one, according to Erikson, 1950-1968, we develop in psychosocial stages in contrast to Freud's psychosocial stages. For another, Erikson emphasized developmental change throughout the human lifespan, whereas Freud argued that our basic personality is shaped in the first 5 years of life. Each stage consists of a unique developmental task that confronts individuals with a crisis that must be faced. According to Erikson, this crisis is a turning point of increased vulnerability and enhanced potential. 1. Trust versus mistrust. This is Erikson's first psychosocial stage, which is experienced in the first year of life. A sense of trust requires a feeling of physical comfort and a minimal amount of fear and apprehension about the future. 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is Erikson's second stage of development, which occurs in late infancy and toddlerhood, 1 to 3 years. After developing trust in their caregivers, infants begin to discover that their behavior is their own. 3. Initiative versus guilt. This is Erikson's third stage of development, which occurs during the preschool years. As preschool children encounter a widening social world, they are challenged more than when they were infants. Uncomfortable guilt feelings may arise, though if the child is irresponsible and is made to feel too anxious. Erikson has a positive outlook to this stage. He believes that most guilt is quickly compensated for by a sense of accomplishment. When 4 to 5 years initiative versus guilt. Stage 3 is the genital locomotor stage or play age. From 3 or 4 to 5 or 6, the task confronting every child is to learn initiative without too much guilt. Initiative means a positive response to the world's challenges, taking on responsibilities, learning new skills, feeling purposeful. Parents can encourage initiative by encouraging children to try out their ideas. We should accept and encourage fantasy, curiosity, and imagination. This is a time for play, not for formal education. The child is now capable, as never before, of imagining a future situation, one that isn't a reality right now. A good balance leads to the psychosocial strength of purpose. A sense of purpose is something many people crave in their lives, yet many do not realize that they themselves make their purposes through imagination and initiative. 2. 6 to 12 years industry versus inferiority. Stage 4 is the latency stage of the school-age child from about 6 to 12. The task is to develop a capacity for industry while avoiding an excessive sense of inferiority. Children must tame their imagination and dedicate themselves to education and to learning the social skills their society requires of them. Too much industry leads to the maladaptive tendency called narrow virtuosity. We see this in children who aren't allowed to be children, the ones that parents or teachers push into one area of competence without allowing the development of broader interests. These are the kids without a life: child actors, child athletes, child musicians, child prodigies of all sorts. We all admire their industry, but if we look a little closer, it's all that stands in the way of an empty life. 3. 12 to 18 years. Identify versus role confusion. Stage 5 is adolescence, beginning with puberty and ending around 18 or 20 years old. The task during adolescence is to achieve ego identity and avoid role confusion. It was adolescence that interested Erikson first, and the patterns he saw here were the basis for his thinking about all the other stages. Ego identity means knowing who you are and how you fit into the rest of society. It requires that you take all you've learned about life and yourself and mold it into a unified self-image. 4. 18 to 30 years intimacy versus isolation. 18 to 30 years intimacy versus isolation is Erikson's sixth developmental stage, which individuals experience during the early adulthood years. At this time, individuals face the developmental task of forming intimate relationships with others. Erikson describes intimacy as finding oneself yet losing oneself in another. If the young adult forms healthy friendships and an intimate relationship with another individual, intimacy will be achieved. If not, isolation will result. 5. Generativity versus stagnation. Generativity versus stagnation is Erikson's seventh developmental stage, which individuals experience during middle adulthood. A chief concern at this stage is to assist the younger generation in developing and leading useful lives. This is what Erikson means by generativity. The feeling of having done nothing to help the next generation is stagnation. The table shows the stages of psychosocial theory of Erik Erikson. Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. John Piaget began his career as a biologist, but his interest in science and the history of science soon overtook his interest in snails and clams. As he delved deeper into the thought processes of doing science, he became interested in the nature of thought itself, especially in the development of thinking. Finding relatively little work done in the area, he had the opportunity to give it a label. He called it genetic epistemology, meaning the study of the development of knowledge. For example, an infant knows how to grab his favorite rattle and thrust it into his mouth. This behavior makes him to do so with other objects. This Piaget called assimilation, specifically assimilating a new object into an old schema. The psychosocial theory of Erik Erikson. When our infant comes across another object again, say a pen, he will try his old schema of grab and thrust. This, of course, works poorly with the new object, so the schema will adapt to the new object. Perhaps, in this example, squeeze and drool would be an appropriate title for the new schema. This is called accommodation, specifically accommodating an old schema to a new object. 1. The sensorimotor stage. The first stage to which we have already referred is the sensorimotor stage. It lasts from birth to about 2 years old. As the name implies, the infant uses senses and motor abilities to understand the world, beginning with reflexes and ending with complex combinations of sensorimotor skills. Between 1 and 4 months, the child works on primary circular reactions, just an action of its own which serves as a stimulus to which it responds with the same action, and around we go. For example, the baby may suck a thumb. That feels good, so she sucks some more. Or she may blow a bubble. That's interesting, so I'll do it again. Between 4 and 12 months, the infant turns to secondary circular reactions, which involve an art that extends out to the environment. She may squeeze a rubber ducky. It goes quack. That's great, so do it again, and again, and again. She's learning procedures that make interesting things last. Between 12 months and 24 months, the child works on tertiary circular reactions. They consist of the same making interesting things last cycle, except with constant variation. I hit the drum with a stick. Rat-tat-tat-tat. I hit the block with the stick. Tom-tom. I hit the table with the stick. Clunk-clunk. I hit daddy with the stick. Hooch-hooch. This kind of active experimentation is best seen during feeding time when discovering new and interesting ways of throwing your spoon, dish, and food. 2. Pre-operational stage. The pre-operational stage lasts from about 2 to about 7 years old. Now that the child has mental representations and is able to pretend, it is a short step to the use of symbols. A symbol is a thing that represents something else. A drawing, a written word, or a spoken word comes to be understood as representing a real dog. The use of language is, of course, the prime example, but another good example of symbol use is creative play, wherein checkers are cookies, papers are dishes, a bus is a table, and so on. By manipulating symbols, we are essentially thinking in a way the infant could not, in the absence of the actual objects involved. Along with symbolization, there is a clear understanding of past and future. Piaget did a study to investigate this phenomenon called the mountain study. He would put children in front of a simple plaster mountain range and sit himself to the side, then ask them to pick from 4 pictures the view that he, Piaget, would see. Younger children would pick the picture of the view they themselves saw. Older kids picked correctly. Similarly, younger children center on one aspect of any problem or communication at a time. For example, they may not understand you when you tell them, "Your father is my husband." Or they may say things like, "I don't live in the USA, I live in Pennsylvania." Or if you show them 5 black and 3 white marbles and ask them, "Are there more marbles or more black marbles?" they will respond, "More black ones." 3. Concrete operation stage. The concrete operation stage lasts from about 7 to about 11. The word operations refer to logical operations or principles we use when solving problems. In this stage, the child not only uses symbols representationally, but can manipulate those symbols logically. Quite an accomplishment, but at this point, they must still perform these operations within the context of concrete situations. The stage begins with progressive decentering. By 6 or 7, most children develop the ability to conserve number, length, and liquid volume. Conservation refers to the ideal that a quantity remains the same despite changes in appearance. Or if you have 2 5-inch sticks laid parallel to each other, then move one of them a little. She may believe that the moved stick is now longer than the other. The concrete operations child, on the other hand, will know that there are still 4 marbles and that the stick doesn't change length even though it now extends beyond the other. And you will know that you have to look at more than just the height of the milk in the glass. If you pour the milk from the short, fat glass into the tall, thin glass, it will tell you that there is the same amount of milk as before, despite the dramatic increase in milk level. By 7 or 8 years old, children develop conservation of substance. If I take a ball of clay and roll it into a long thin rod, or even split it into 10 little pieces, the child knows that there is still the same amount of clay. And it will know that if you roll it all back into a single ball, it will look quite the same as it was before, a feature known as reversibility. By 9 or 10, the last of the conservation test is mastered, conservation of area. If you take 4 1-inch square pieces of felt and lay them on a 6 by 6 cloth together in the center, the child who conserves will know that they take up just as much room as the same square spread out in the corners, or for that matter, anywhere at all. Formal operation stage. But a child at the formal operation stage has a hard time applying his newfound logical abilities to non-concrete, that is, abstract events. If mom says to Junior, "You shouldn't make fun of that boy's nose," how would you feel if someone did that to you? He's likely to respond, "I don't have a big nose." Even this simple lesson may well be too abstract, too hypothetical for his kind of thinking. From around 12 on, a child enters the formal operation stage. Here the child becomes increasingly competent at adult-style thinking. This involves using logical operations and using them in the abstract rather than the concrete. We often call this hypothetical thinking. Here is a simple example of a task that a concrete operations child couldn't do, but which a formal operations teenager or adult could with a little time and effort. Consider this rule about a set of cards that have letters on one side and numbers on the other. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other side. Take a look at the cards below and tell me, which cards do I need to turn over to tell if this rule is actually true? You will find the answer at the end of this chapter. It is the formal operation stage that allows one to investigate a problem in a careful and systematic fashion. Ask a 16-year-old to tell you the rules for making pendulums swing quickly or slowly, and he may proceed like this. A long string with a light weight, let's see how fast that swings. A long string with a heavy weight, let's try that. Now, a short string with a light weight, and finally, a short string with a heavy weight. His experiment, and it is an experiment, will tell him that a short string leads to a fast swing and a long string to a slow swing, and that the weight of the pendulum means nothing at all. The teenager has learned to group possibilities in 4 different ways. By conjunction, both A and B make a difference, e.g., both the string's length and the pendulum's weight. By disjunction, it is either this or that, e.g., it's either the length or the weight. By implication, if it's this, then that will happen, the formation of a hypothesis. By incompatibility, when this happens, that doesn't, the elimination of a hypothesis. On top of that, it can operate on the operations, a higher level of grouping. If you have a proposition, such as it could be the string or the weight, you can do 4 things with it. Identity, leave it alone. It could be the string or the weight. Negation, negate the component and replace or with ands, and vice versa. It might not be the string and not the weight either. Reciprocity, negate the component but keep the ands and ors as they are. Either it is not the weight or it is not the string. Correlativity, keep the components as they are but replace ors with ands, etc. It's the weight and the string. Someone who has developed his or her formal operations will understand that the correlate of a reciprocal is a negation, that a reciprocal of a negation is a correlate, that the negation of a correlate is a reciprocal, and that the negation of a reciprocal of a correlate is an identity. Studies section 4 summary. In this study, you have learned about 1. The Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory. 2. Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. 3. John Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. This is the end of study section 4. Thanks for listening.